What's going on, U.S. history people? This is Mr. Norris.
And Mr. Lawrence.
And we are going to talk to you about key events leading to the American Revolution. So we're going to pick up from the French and Indian War and go all the way up to the Declaration of Independence. So let's get going.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, 1763, an important year that we have to know when we're understanding kind of the causes of the American Revolution and the actual revolution itself. The first thing we have to know is the end of the French and Indian War. So some basic things about the French and Indian War. We know that it's between the French, Native Americans, against the British, representing the American colonists. So why do we know the British win? Well, we're speaking English right now, so the British will have pretty much full control over the northern colonies in North America. France will ultimately be removed. There'll be a little pocket of French speaking people left, even to this day we see in Quebec.
All right, so let's take a look at this map. You mentioned how France is pretty much removed from North America. You see here on the left, this is the pre-war boundaries in 1754 before the French and Indian War. And everywhere you see orange is the French. And on the right, you notice that there is no orange here. So the French are essentially completely removed from North America. And up here in Quebec, we do have some people there still that speak French. But everywhere that you see purple is now British controlled. So Britain gained a lot of land as a result of the French and Indian War. We also have a very important concept called salutary neglect, and this ends in 1763. And what salutary neglect is it simply means that Britain is leaving the colonies alone as long as they're making money. But Great Britain is in debt. So, Mr. Lawrence, why is Britain in need of money now that this war is over? They just won a war. Why are they in debt?
Well, wars are very expensive. Whether wars are fought in 2013 or fought in 1763, countries have to shell out a lot of cash to pay for them.
So where are they going to get this cash from? Where are they going to get a source of revenue?
So what they decide to do is they see all these colonists sitting over here in North America and say, hey, let's tax these guys. We helped to protect them during this war from the French and Native Americans trying to take back their land. We said, let's tax them and make some cash off them.
And the colonists were not happy about that. But you're absolutely correct. The Americans, for the most part, were not really taxed that heavily. Certainly the taxes were not enforced, but they began. Now, another very important event is the Proclamation Line of 1763. Now, in our geography video, we talked a lot about the Appalachian Mountains here, which is this boundary between the red and the pink area here, and that is the Appalachian or Appalachian Mountains. And the Proclamation Line of 1763, issued by King George III, said,
you can't move west.
So it forbid expansion beyond the mountains. Why are the colonists upset about this?
Well, once again, the colonists felt that the war was over between the British and the French. It would give them a new opportunity to move west, take advantage of natural resources, start new farms. Now, all of a sudden, once the war is over, the British are coming in and telling those American colonists, nope, no go. You have to stay east of the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay, let's talk about some more important acts and events that will face the colonists in the 1760s and the 1770s. The first one is the Sugar Act. This was a tax on...
Is it sugar?
I think you're right. Sugar, molasses, yes. So it is a tax on sugar. Then we have the Stamp Act.
Is that a tax on stamps?
It is. And also 50 commonly used goods. So playing cards, marriage licenses, newspapers. If there's a paper document, you had to pay a tax. Mr. Lawrence, out of the Sugar and the Stamp Acts, which one affected more colonists?
Well, I'm going to say the Stamp Act for a couple of reasons. One, in the 1760s, everything that was done on paper. But also, I see from your PowerPoint, it's bold. So let's take it.
Ooh, I like that.
Let's use that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So it was very hard for people not to purchase something that was made of paper, which would be taxed. Then we have this guy, Charles Townsend, and the Townsend Acts. What did they do?
Townsend Acts, well, they're going to be important because they tax tea, glass, and lead. But you'll see, tea is the real big thing here. Ladies and gentlemen, from your studies of global history, you should know that the British, they love their tea. They still love their tea today.
They do.
And if that's going to get taxed, that's going to affect a lot of colonists. So as a result, it's going to cause a lot of uprising, specifically in highly populated areas where you see a lot of economic activity, like Boston, New York.
Harbors as well, yeah. Do you have you ever had Earl Grey tea?
I have.
Is it good?
It's very good.
I don't like hot drinks, so I don't drink tea. Let's go on to the Boston Massacre. This is where there was a crowd of American protesters and British soldiers. Nobody really knows why this happens, but all of a sudden the British start firing on the colonists, and we have 5 Americans that die, and these are really seen as the first deaths in the American Revolution. And here is a very famous engraving of this massacre, and it was by
Paul Revere. So you guys remember, they say the gentleman who rode the Massachusetts countryside saying that the British were coming. And again, it's very unfortunate that 5 Americans were killed, but really what this was used as a propaganda tool against the British from the colonists, from the Sons of Liberty, to really try and build support against British rule and the British military.
Yeah, what's missing here, you don't see the colonists here throwing snowballs filled with stones at the British soldiers. That would hurt getting hit in the face by one of those. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about tea. You just mentioned it. We have the Tea Act in 1773, which was designed to help out a company called the British East India Company. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, so the British gave them a monopoly and said, you are the sole providers of tea for North America. It actually lowered the cost of tea, but the colonists were still upset. Why?
Well, because they felt that this very famous slogan from the time period that almost all of us have heard before is this: no taxation without representation. It wasn't that the colonists were against the idea of taxation. That's what most governments do. But it was against the idea that colonists didn't really have a say within the parliamentary government of Great Britain. Many British were kind of perplexed by the colonists' belief that the British government wasn't very democratic. It was one of the most westernized democratic countries of the time, but because the colonists in America did not have the right to bring in representation into Parliament, they felt that they were slighted, that they were not seen as equals to their fellow British citizens back home in London.
You know, that's a good point. Again, most colonists were okay with their own colonies taxing them, but not the British, and it goes back to the idea of representation. Well said. Then we have the Boston Tea Party, which is a response to this tax on tea, in which you see many Americans dress up as Native Americans. They go to Boston, board some ships, and dump about $30 million worth of tea.
It's a lot of tea.
It's a lot of tea. And then this leads directly to, the Boston Tea Party leads directly to the Intolerable or the Coercive Acts. And what are those all about?
So this was really designed to punish Boston. Specifically, after the Boston Tea Party, the British government said enough is enough, and we're going to close down the harbor, which is kind of the heart of economic development in the Northeast. So once this happened, merchants are unable to make money, people are unable to go to work, so this is going to cause a lot of unrest in the city of Boston.
They also established a new quartering act, and we know that a quartering act is when the British soldiers could come to your house and say, we're going to stay here tonight, and I'd like a nice hot meal for dinner and a nice comfortable bed too. And the colonists would not get compensated for this whatsoever. All right, we're going to talk about the independence movement now. We have Lexington and Concord. You were just in Boston, Mr. Lawrence. Why don't you tell us about this?
So Lexington and Concord, this is really seen where the war itself begins. It was the first battle where Colonial Minutemen actually come out to prevent the British from trying to disarm them in their small villages of Lexington and Concord. So very important just to understand this is where the war itself really starts.
Then we have the olive branch petition, and an olive branch is a symbol for peace. So this is issued after Lexington and Concord and a couple other battles, and the colonists are saying to the king, let's just make up and be friends. Forget that we've had these little skirmishes, let's just be friends and go back to the days of salutary neglect, go back to 1763. King George III wanted none of this. He said no. Then we have a very famous book or pamphlet called Common Sense.
So when you think of common sense, you think of basic ideas, and Thomas Paine, that's why he named it. So T-Paine, we see, is going to produce this pamphlet, and it's going to be very popular reading material across the colonies. So it was common sense to break away from Great Britain. This is what he said, that in order to preserve our natural rights as Americans, that our next step is to break the chains that he saw between the colonies and the British Empire.
Yeah, absolutely. And he also talked about that nowhere in this world does a smaller body control a larger body. So you have this tiny little island of Great Britain. It should not control this large continent of North America. Then we have the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776, written by Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so this war goes on for 8 years. How on earth did this little upstart country of the United States actually win? Well, there was another country that played a very important role, and that was the French. They provided aid, both military aid, but especially naval aid. And there was this guy, the Marquis De Lafayette. I think that was good. Was that good?
That's really good.
He helped get French aid, and Ben Franklin did as well. So once the French entered the side on the Americans, America really starts to do well.
So what are some military advantages? So we have to realize that a lot of people in the colonies were understood how powerful the British military was at the time, and this idea that this small group of colonial soldiers can be able to beat the most advanced military in the world at the time was unthought of. But there were advantages the Americans had, specifically home field advantage. They knew the terrain, they knew how to fight, and they weren't necessarily willing to just stand face to face and fight the British in all battles. So as time went on, it became too long, too costly for the British, and the use of guerrilla warfare really started to change the tide of the war against the British, and popular feeling back home in England said, you know what, maybe it's not worth holding on to these colonies to continue to fight the Americans.
Okay, that's it for us. Thank you for watching. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions or comments on the video, leave them below. And really, Thomas Paine, he even agrees that it's common sense to subscribe here. So take a minute, hit that button. Thank you very much, and have a good day, guys.